This is the ultimate guide how to buy vintage Accutron. It took me many months to gather all of this information and to figure it out. But you will be able to learn all of this in this short 10-minute video. And we are starting with the biggest issue of authenticity of vintage Accutrons is watches assembled from parts, or watches that have incorrect parts. So Accutrons pretty much have just like two movements, like 214 and 218. So pretty much like everything fits everywhere. That's why this issue is so common and you see it everywhere. That's why the main thing that you need to do is to be able to identify vintage Accutron. You should be able to know the exact watch that Bulova made, and after you identified vintage Accutron, you can compare it to the Accutron that you are trying to sell. The hands, the dial, all the printing, the case, the material, but you need to identify vintage Accutron that Bulova actually made first to be able to do it. So how to identify vintage Accutron? So most of Accutrons that Bulova made had two things. Had humanly readable name. For example, this watch is called Astronaut Mark II-C. And also they had this catalog number. So this watch had the catalog number 25608Y. Now, where do you find them? So there are actually two sources. One source, there is actually a book. There is big Accutron book written by Daryl Hansen. And there are like most of Accutrons that Bulova made are in the book. There is a second source that's actually real vintage ads that show Accutrons that Bulova was advertising for sale. So you can find vintage ads on mybulova.com, and you can also find vintage ads on eBay. You don't actually need to buy the ad, just see what's available for sale or what was sold in the past. So let's look at my watch. So you can see here in Daryl Hansen's book that the watch is there. The watch is actually called Accutron Mark II-C, and you actually see the catalog number 25608Y. Also, I was able to find this vintage ad, and in vintage ad you can see that my watch is actually called Accutron Mark II-C. In some other ads you can see the catalog number or both, but that's how you actually identify the watch. Now, once you identify the watch that Bulova was actually selling, now you can compare it to the watch available for sale. And you should check everything if that's the correct watch or not. So two things about the book. So you can hunt it on eBay, you can try to buy it, maybe you can get a deal or something like that. If you're in New York City, the Horological Society of New York has this book in their library. You don't need to pay anything, you don't need to be a member, just show up at the library and you will be able to work with this book. Also, later I will tell you about Accutron Collectors Group. There are people there who actually have the book and will be able to help you. Redials. Actually not as common with vintage Accutron as, like, for example, vintage Grand Seiko, but they still exist. There are not that many of them. They're easy to spot, but make sure, so first of all, you identify vintage Accutron that you want to buy, the one that actually Bulova was selling, and take a dial of that watch that Bulova was actually selling and compare everything on that watch with the watch that you are actually buying. Make sure like all the letters are correct, the type is correct, all the printing is correct. But yeah, redials are not as common. Another thing that you need to do is you need to check that movement is actually Accutron movement, because there are many watches with quartz replacements. Bulova actually even sold these kits that you get to replace your Accutron movement that they stopped supporting with the quartz movement. So this is actually a very common ESA quartz movement that was used as a replacement for Accutrons. So very often the sellers they tell you that they don't know how to open the watch, so they can show you the picture of the movement. So how do you know without opening the watch that the movement inside of your Accutron is actually Accutron? So first of all, if you can see the watch running, so over here the Accutron with the Accutron movement, so you see that this is Accutron because you have a sweeping second hand. Now in this replacement quartz movement, you can see that the second hand is actually taken, and taken means quartz. Now if you do not know that you cannot see the watch running, the actually very knowledgeable admin from the Accutron group shared these tips. So if your Accutron has date or a day date, then if it has a replacement quartz movement, the day and date they don't fit perfectly. So you will always see this tape that you see on the side, but over here you see that the day, date, and day they fit perfectly, so no tape is needed. There is this scam with solid gold Accutrons that you need to know about. So what dishonest sellers do, they take a solid gold case back, like over here it says 14 karat solid gold, and they put this case back on the gold-filled watches. And so they tell you that the whole watch is solid gold. So how do you know that your watch actually has a solid gold case, not just a case back? So all American Accutrons had this stamp that not many people know about. So here between the lugs at 6 o'clock there is this 14 karat stamp in all American Accutrons that tells you that not just a case back, but the whole case is solid gold. The unfortunate thing about that case that often that stamp is worn out or polished off, kind of like over here. So, and if this is not incorrect, like that actually happens very, very often. So how do I know that this case is actually solid gold? So first of all, I identified my watch. That's a Mark IIc, and all the hands are correct, dial is correct, everything is correct. So that's already a good sign that this whole watch is solid gold. Also over here, if I look between the lugs, there is no stamp, but I see that there is some remnant of something was here where the 14 karat stamp should be. It just worn out. So that's again a very good sign that this watch is solid gold. But also a very knowledgeable collector from the Accutron group shared this tip with me. So solid gold watches are noticeably heavier than gold-filled or stainless steel watches. So he shared with me the weight of his solid gold Mark IIc. His actually does have a stamp over here. And he also shared with me the weight of very, very similar stainless steel watch, and you see that the weight of stainless steel is noticeably less. And I also, and after that, I weighted my Mark IIc, and I see that the weight of my watch is very similar to the weight of his solid gold Mark IIc. Radium versus Tritium. So sometime in 1963, Bulova moved from using radium to tritium. This means that all Accutrons with movement 218. Because 218 was launched later, they use Tritium loom. Now if you have 214, then some early 214s, they still use Radium, but later 214s use Tritium. It's very easy to spot the watch that uses 218 movement, because you actually see the crown usually at 4 o'clock. All 214 watches, they had this crown at the back, and that unfortunately has waterproofing consequences today. Those watches were still waterproof when they were made, but because Bulova stopped making those parts for that special crown in 214, and for waterproofness you actually need a fresh part. So unfortunately today you cannot waterproof 214 Accutrons because of that part in that special crown. But 218s, they have more kind of normal waterproofing that other watches used, so you are able to get new crown gaskets, new case back gasket, you can pressure test them. So I my watchmaker waterproofed and pressure tested this watch, so it passed a half bar pressure test, and after he tested it to 0.7 bars, and this watch also passed a pressure test. One unfortunate thing that you should know about Accutrons is that if you hack it, if you stop the second hand, then the movement actually keeps buzzing, so it keeps running, it drains the battery. So this is very different from like Hamilton Electrics. So I actually hacked it here, so that fully disconnected the battery and that stopped the movement. If I stop my Accutron, unfortunately it will keep draining the battery and the movement will keep running. So the battery life for Accutrons, for electrics, or like for LED watches is about 1 year. Dating. So all Accutrons, they have a date code here on the back. So it is over here. So there is a letter and a number. Letter means decade, M is 1960s, N is 1970s, and after there is a number, this is year in that decade. So for example, this is M9, so this is 1960s decade and year 9. So this watch was made in 1969. Watchmakers and parts. So the great thing about Bulova Accutrons that there are so many more watchmakers than, for example, that can service Hamilton Electric. So there are so many of these watchmakers. Try to find a watchmaker that mostly services only Accutrons, because those watchmakers, they have parts. Parts are plentiful for Accutrons, because again there is only like 2 movements and there are like plenty of parts. But watchmakers that service like everything, they probably don't have parts, they don't know how to get them. So get this watchmaker who specializes only on Accutrons. So if watch is properly serviced, you should be able to get accuracy within 1 minute a month. Not a day, but a month. Try to join some community of Accutron collectors. A lot of the information that you see in this video comes from this community. So all Accutron collectors are actually on Facebook. And I hate Facebook, but I'm there only because of collecting watches. So there are actually several Accutron groups. I joined this one. So people from this group helped me a lot. Now when you're all excited about the Accutrons, you actually want to see this video when I'm showing you some watches from Bulova Museum to figure out what's there, all the wonderful watches that are not only at the museum, but the one that you can buy for yourself.